Welcome back to my channel and to the second part of The Wooing of Étain. If you haven't watched the first part, I would recommend you go back and do so. Otherwise, lean back, relax and enjoy the second part of The Wooing of Étain. We go back to a time after the second part of the curse, when Eochaid took the throne of Tara and became the High King of Ireland. Submitted to him, the 5 kings of the 5 parts of Ireland. As a new king, he invited all of them to a big festival in Tara to discuss their taxes and tributes to him. Unfortunately, the 5 kings refused to attend the festival as long as their new High King had no wife. Eochaid sighed. He needed a queen as soon as possible. And so he sent out his men to every corner of Ireland to find the fairest maiden in all the land. And he emphasized that she must be a maiden, for no man should have lain with her before him. Each of the men sent out returned with a fair young maiden, but none was so fair as the daughter of Étain. And so Eochaid married Étain, for she was his equal in lineage, youth and splendor. It came to be that Eochaid, the High King, had 2 brothers, one of whom was Étain. And no, this Étain is not the same as Étain's first father. This Étain met Étain at the celebrations in Tara and instantly fell in love with her. He used every opportunity to gaze at her. He was ashamed that he loved his brother's newlywed wife, but he couldn't help himself. His desire was strong and he was weak. He tried to hide his feelings as good as possible, but in doing so, he grew sick. So sick indeed that he was on the brink of death. The High King called his healer Fuamnach to attend his brother, and the healer came to the conclusion that there could only be one of 2 diagnoses. Either he was in love or he was jealous. Either way, no healer would be able to help him. But Étain, still ashamed of his feelings, refused to confess what sickened him. Full of sorrow for his brother, Eochaid went on a long walk, leaving Étain alone with Étain and enough money to manage everything in case of Étain's death. But Étain didn't die for days, and every day Étain came by to speak with Étain. And in doing so, without even knowing it, she lifted his spirits. For as long as he could gaze at her, he wasn't ready to die. Étain noticed after a while that day by day, every time she attended Étain, his sickness seemed to lift. And one day she finally asked him what the cause of his sickness was. And Étain finally confessed that he was deeply in love with her. She answered that it was a pity he didn't say that earlier, for otherwise he could have been healed. And he answered that it's not too late for him yet, if she'd be willing. And indeed, she was willing. She continued to come to him every day, to bathe his head, carve his meat, and pour water on his hands. 27 days passed by, and Étain recovered to his old health. Carefully he asked when he was about to have what could cure him fully, and she answered that he could have it the next day, but not in the dwelling of the prince, but on the hill above the court. Étain was in joyful anticipation and waited through the night for his tryst. But when the time came, he fell asleep and did not wake until the next day. When Étain came for the tryst with Étain, she saw a man awaiting her and found a man who looked just like Étain. The stranger told her that she could go no further. He was too weak and sick, and so she turned around and went back home. Étain awoke the next day and was deeply worried what Étain might think of him. But when Étain met him, She asked why he seemed to be so sad, and he told her that he was deeply sorry for not telling her that he wouldn't come to the tryst he asked of her. But Étain was weirdly calm and told him that there's always a next day, and that they could meet this night instead. This time Éilil was determined to stay awake. He sat by the fire and had a bucket full of water at his side to wash his eyes in case he became tired. But it was of no use. Again he fell asleep. The same thing happened 3 more times, while Étain always met the stranger. Finally, on the 4th night, Étain asked the stranger who he was. She explained to him that the planned tryst was in no way unjust, or to hurt her husband, but to heal a king of Ireland from his sickness and to save his life. The stranger just nodded and told her that it would be more fitting if she would lay with him, for she was Étain, daughter of Éilil, and his wife. Étain didn't really know what to think, and asked again who the stranger was. He answered that his name was Midir of Briley, and that it was Fuamnach who separated them. And he asked her if she would go with him, but Étain refused, for she was the wife of the High King, and he was only a stranger. But Midir insisted that it was him who made Éilil fall in love with her, and wither away for not being able to have her, but that he also took away all carnal desire from Éilil, so that Étain's honor wouldn't suffer. Midir didn't try to pressure Étain, but he told her to come to him if Óg ever beats her, and she agreed. When Étain returned home, she found Éilil cured from his sickness as well as his desire for her. A few days later, Óg returned home to find his brother healed, and they rejoiced. Well, this could have been a happy end to a tragic love story, but the story doesn't end here either. Time went by and life was good, until one summer day, when the High King awoke and went to his terrace in Tara to gaze over the beautiful plains of his kingdom. Suddenly, a strange warrior stood beside him. He wore a purple tunic, had blue eyes and golden hair, bound with a golden ring, with a golden spear in one hand and a silver shield in the other. What Óg didn't know, this was the warrior that appeared to Étain and the maidens years prior, with the dark prophecy of sorrow, war, and death. Óg was confused. Where had he come from? For courts weren't open yet, and he hadn't seen this warrior before. He cautiously welcomed the stranger and asked him what he wanted. The stranger introduced himself as Midir and told Óg that he had come to play a game of Fidchell with him. Óg instantly bragged how good a Fidchell player he was, but he also stated that his wife was still asleep and his Fidchell board in her room. Midir showed Óg the board he had brought with him and challenged him to a game. His board was a piece of art. The board was silver, and the game figures were golden and bronze. Each corner of the silver board was covered in precious stones. All in all, it might be the most expensive and most beautiful board Óg had ever seen. While Óg stared at the board, Midir started to set up the game until Óg stopped him. He stated that he would only play for a stake. Midir nodded and asked for the wager. Óg said he doesn't care as long as there is one, and so it was on Midir to settle a wager. And so Midir spoke that if Óg wins, he would get 50 dark grey horses with dappled blood-red heads, pointy ears, broad-chested, with distant nostrils, slender limbs, mighty keen eyes, huge, swift, steady, easily yoked, with 50 enameled reins, and they would be his as soon as the next morning. Óg agreed to those terms and promised the same if he should lose. And so a game of Fidchell began, and Midir lost. As promised, the horses stood in Óg's backyard the very next morning. as did Midir, asking for another game of Fidchell. Again, Óg asked for the wager, and Midir answered that this time they would gamble for 50 young boars with horses' hooves, blue backs, together with a web of blackthorns, in which they would all fit. Also, 50 swords with golden hilts, 50 with ivory hilts, 50 cows with red ears, and white calves with 3 red heads and 3 horns, as well as 50 speckled cloaks. Óg hesitated for a second, and then agreed. Again they played, and again Midir lost. And again the promised wager was brought to Óg until the next morning. During the next days, Óg lay a task as wagers upon Midir. He had to clear Meath of stones, put rushes over Tabor, build a causeway, and put a wood over Braine. Midir protested that those tasks are way too much to ask, but Óg insisted. In the end, Midir agreed, but requested that if he was to do those tasks, Óg had to promise that no man or woman left their house until dawn. Óg agreed, and so they played, and again Midir lost. The High King commanded a steward to watch Midir doing the tasks, and the steward came back telling Óg about the magic he just witnessed, magic like no other. While the steward spoke, Midir approached the two men with a grin on his face. After he was greeted by Óg, Midir stated that the burden laid upon him was unreasonable and that he was angry. Óg tried to calm the situation by suggesting another game of Fidchell, and Midir agreed. When Óg asked what Midir wanted as stakes, Midir answered that this time the stakes was a wish. Óg agreed, and this time Midir won. When asked what his wish was, Midir answered that he wanted his arms around Étain and a kiss from her. Óg fell silent, but then agreed that this will be granted when Midir would come back a month later. As you can imagine, Midir had planned all of this. He deliberately lost a few times, just so that he can make this exact wish. A month later, Óg and his queen gave a feast for the lords, but locked the court, for they knew a man with great magical abilities was on his way. Étain served the lords when around midnight Midir arrived. Well, Midir has always been a handsome man, but on this evening he looked even better than normally. Everyone was astonished when they saw him, and the room fell silent. Óg welcomed him, and Midir told him that he had come to claim his prize. Óg stated that he hadn't thought about that matter when Midir suddenly cut him off, stating that Étain had already agreed to come away with him. As he spoke those words, Étain blushed and said that, well, she told Midir before that she would only go with him if Óg gave her to him. Óg interrupted the conversation, stating that he would never sell Étain, but he would allow him to put his arm around her, here in the middle of the house, in front of everyone. Midir agreed, put his weapons into his left hand, and then put his right arm around Étain, kissed her, and then magically disappeared with her. The guests swore they had seen 2 swans outside the house, flying away. Shocked and angry, Óg made his men follow them and bring Étain back. They followed them from Shee to Shee, from Fairy Mount to Fairy Mount, and dug each of them up. Óg was determined to dig every fairy mount in all of Ireland up until Étain was returned to him. They began to dig up Sheban Find, but were stopped by the people inside and instructed to go to the mount of the king of the Shee, for he had his wife. And so Óg left and went to the mount of the king of the Shee, and started to dig it up. He and his men dug for 15 months, but it was a fruitless endeavor, for everything they dug up was always restored the next morning. Óg was frustrated. Someone must have played a trick on him. And so he and his men went back to Sheban Find where they were before and started digging it up again. Again someone came out to stop them. They asked Óg why he did that to them, for they were not the ones who had taken his wife. They hadn't done any harm to him. They gave Óg the advice to get himself blind cats and dogs and set them loose before and after the digging every day. And so Óg went back to the mount of Midir, Shibrilay, and they began to dig again. This time Midir came out. He asked Óg why he did that, for he had sold his wife to him, and therefore he hadn't done anything wrong. Óg angrily answered that Étain shouldn't be with Midir. Midir obliged, and told Óg that she would return to him the next morning. Óg was pleased, and returned home waiting for his wife to return. But to his surprise, the next morning he found 50 women in his home, all looking like Étain. Everybody was silent and stared at those ladies, but they were also tired from the whole charade and told Óg to choose his wife and to get it over with. Óg wasn't sure which of those ladies was the right one, but he knew his wife was the best in serving drinks, so he let all of them serve drinks, for he was sure he would know which one is Étain just from watching them. They all served, and Óg wasn't sure, but decided that one of them had to be Étain. He took his pick and everybody was satisfied and left. Time went by, and next summer Óg awoke in his bed and spoke with his wife in the court. As they spoke, a man came into the room. It was no other than Midir. Midir complained to Óg that he didn't play fair, for Midir had done everything asked of him, while Óg didn't stay true to his word. Óg answered that he didn't sell his wife to Midir. Midir nodded calmly and asked if Óg's conscience was clear and his mind at ease, to which Óg said that indeed it was. Midir grinned and told Óg that so was his conscience. When he took Étain, she was pregnant, and she gave birth to a daughter, to exactly the woman Óg was with right now, while the real Étain still was with Midir, and he vanished. Óg was in shock, but did not dare to dig up another fairy mount. He was horrified that he had lain with his own daughter, and when he learned that she was with child, and she bore him a daughter, he told his men to throw the child into a pit of beasts, so that he may never look upon her. His men were terrified, and took the child to the house of Finnam, the herdsman of Tara, and threw the child in with the dogs. When the herdsman and his wife returned home, they saw the unharmed fair baby next to the dogs, and were amazed. Since they had no child of their own, they took the girl in as their own, and raised her to a crafty woman that was more than talented in embroidery. Meanwhile, the High King grew evil, and his mind was troubled. As much as the people once loved him, as hated he grew in their eyes, and in the end, the people just couldn't take any more from him. They hatched a plot against him, and shortly after, Óg was slain. As for Étain, her memories had returned the second Midir had kissed her, and so she and Midir lived a happy life afterwards. Despite many obstacles, Midir and Étain had found each other for good, and were able to live together and embrace their love, even though it had taken centuries for them to finally be together, happy ever after. Finally, a love story with a more or less happy ending. I hope you liked the story. Please leave a thumbs up and leave a comment on what story you would like me to tell in the future. Thank you for listening. See you next time. Bye!